that respect in Latvia. Liga is not only a graduate of the L'Oreal Award for Women, but she's also in the Solid Particles Institute under the Latvian University, and is at the moment trying to solve an enormous problem: how to rule the hydrogen so that we can drive the hydrogen-powered cars. And Liga is now give us a detailed presentation of what can be achieved as soon as her work is ready and as soon as she will be selling this solution around the globe. We'll have hydrogen-powered cars available to us, the cars that we are waiting already for 20 years. How long must we still wait, Liga? Well, we already have them. This is what I can already tell you. Thank you, Ansis, for introducing me, but this is what I can tell you right away. We have the hydrogen cars, but whether we can buy them is another question. Whether we have them, our disposal, is still a question. But to put it briefly, if we are talking about alternative technologies, what is the alternative technologies? Me choosing a diesel car instead of a gas car, is it an alternative? Because it is an alternative from my perspective. But let's look at the Vienna Convention of the 2006. And we have to agree with what is being said, because alternative technologies and equipment are the technologies and equipment that allow us to reduce or totally avoid adverse emissions. And in this case, we are talking about the ozone layers and its impact on the human health, and not only about the status of the ozone layer as such. If we are talking about alternative transport, we are not saying that today we should abandon the gas cars and petrol cars and should use the hydrogen cars, but there are minimum criteria that should be complied with in order to call something an alternative transport. This has been developed by US researchers. So the distance that the car can travel before the refueling has to be 480 kilometers, which is totally acceptable to us. The refueling has to be quick and simple. If we have to wait for 20 minutes with a hose in our hands, I don't think it's what we want. If we have to wait 8 hours for the batteries to recharge, I don't think this is again what we want. This is another question that needs to be solved as we transit or go over, switch to the alternative technologies. So this transport should be available to provide the speed of 70 kilometers an hour. If we use the alternative vehicle with pedals, let's say, and if we drive at the speed of 50 kilometers, I don't think everybody will be happy, although we will be very green and very alternative. And of course, we need to reduce the hazardous emissions as well and reduce the use of fossil fuels. And what comes to our mind is a very resource-efficient fuel, a resource-efficient engine, and hopefully our members of the parliament will use this vehicle to come here and talk to us in the discussion to follow. If we go over to the real situation, this is of course a good alternative, however not suitable to everybody. Though if we're talking about alternative technologies for the transport, we must also bear in mind that with respect to the environment, this transport mode should be addressed not from the point of view of manufacturing, shouldn't think about the manufacturing aspects of this vehicle and the emissions created, but we should address it from the emission point of view, from the exhaust fume point of view. And one of the alternatives, and one of the most distant future for us, is the hydrogen-powered cars. Hydrogen-powered cars are the most difficult because the technologies are very expensive. Technologies are being developed, improved, simplified, but scientists and the production companies already know how to produce it. There are prototypes that have been created. However, it is comparatively, expensive vehicle, and in order to shift to the hydrogen or any other new technology, we need a certain preparation stage. We cannot say overnight, I'm tomorrow going to switch to a bicycle or anything else, no matter what the distance. We need some sort of transition period. So one of the transition vehicles is the electro cars and hybrids. If we look back into the history, the transport has been, the most futuristic vehicle. The first vehicle was based on the hydrogen, was devised in 1807, as you see here. The first oil deposits were worked on ever since 1800. Came later. Then came the electromobile in 1832 to 1839. The historians are not certain in which year the electro car was introduced, or electro carriage, as it was called, was introduced. And it's also worth mentioning Camille with its torpedo, the Never Satisfied, which set the speed record of 105 km per hour in 1899, and this record was beat only 100 years from then. So historically the auto cars have been a subject of research only. Then comes petrol car in 1870. Siegfried Marcus introduced the petrol cars for transportation of cargo, and of course Carl Benz car, which was devised and patented 15 years later and was meant mainly for human use and prestige. Then came the hybrid car that could travel 65 km with the acid accumulator, AC generator. So this is the ideal that we should be aiming at. Nevertheless, the scientists have been working very early on various alternative transportation. And here are the key problems that need to be eliminated in order to provide for economic viability and safety of such cars, because hydrogen, is something that makes people afraid. Hydrogen is highly explosive, and natural gas is also highly explosive, so it depends on the safety of the use. And the fuel. We need to know where to get the fuel, how to store the fuel, whether the engine will tolerate this fuel or will tolerate other fuels. If we make hybrids, then we have to work on the overheating of the engine and efficient running of the engine, because the efficiency and environmental friendliness is what drives the scientific research forward and leads to discoveries. And also the fuel tanks is another question, how big they should be, because hydrogen is a gas. We can't just pour it into a fuel tank. We need to have tailor-made or specific tanks. Accumulator, it is the battery, or the battery is a way of fuel. It needs to have a long enough lifespan. We need to have the engine, and of course fueling issues need to be get out of the way so we could easily use the alternative vehicle. If we're talking about the fuel, the hydrogen is a gas. It burns very well, but it's very difficult to produce it. We cannot just drill and get the hydrogen coming out of the earth. Biofuel is one of the options, but that is again a transition fuel for early stages of the environmentally friendly cars. In order to get the biofuel, we need to use a lot of energy, plowing the fields and for example growing the rapeseed, and we need to also have the areas for the rapeseed, but there are many people who would require that. Biofuel is a good transition stage to introduce alternatives and reduce the harmful hazardous emissions. However, the biofuel also generates CO2. Electricity is suitable only for electro cars. Electricity doesn't have any kind of emissions, which is good, but electricity plus or fossil fuels plus are the options for the hybrid cars. Electricity, is usually combined with a fossil fuel, or the most popular is to combine electricity with the petrol. The fossil fuel, there are prototypes where the fossil fuel is combined with the hydrogen, and all these potential combinations are available for hybrids in order to reduce the emissions and make the driving economically viable. And this is where the main researches are conducted. If we're talking about the engine, the hydrogen engine differs from the regular petrol engine